So, Mike, thanks for the talks, both of you. And my question is, I think, mostly for Cruz. So, you, and it makes good sense, I think, seem to be articulating to state phobia something more than just an anathema towards the state, but a certain kind of anathema towards bureaucrats and members of the intelligentsia. So, how would we think about describing this differently then? Is it a kind of resentment for institutional position? Or is it resentment or opposition to authority? If we were going to put state to the side and use a different word to describe the phobia.
Yeah, I mean, I took the phrase state phobia from this book about Foucault's politics. And it's an in-your-face kind of term, right? Because Foucault is the most quoted person of our time and so on and so forth. So for people, it serves my purposes for people to worry that, you know, when they're being enthusiastic about Foucault or mildly critical but using him, they're also buying into something like state phobia. That said, I agree with you. I don't think that the state is really a sufficiently precise way of describing what I'm talking about. And I mean, I don't think that you know, socialism is the thing that people really hate when they think about liberal elites, and I don't think the state is exactly what they're hating when they're hating liberal elites. And I'm personally very open to anybody who would get into the naming game. The only reason that it seemed acceptable to me to fudge that a little bit is because I do think that, let's say, the difference between private universities and public universities, or professionally credentialed people and state credentialed bureaucrats, I don't think that's clear to people. I think it's people who are taking authority from something other than money. And a lot of times it has to do with education, but probably in a lot of cases it doesn't. So, you know, the Trump voter who runs into a person at the Motor Vehicle Bureau who's a black woman, you know, and thinks, how the hell am I having to stand online, you know, because of this person who's black and a woman? Well, the state gives positions to women and minorities and lets them, you know, boss me or something. I mean, I'm not fantasizing, but I think that there's not a clear word that would, with both the sort of the state and the non-state forms of educationally credentialed authority and expertise, that gets all the resentment. And you know, personally, if people found this interesting enough to try to get into the naming, that would be great. But so I sort of share your question, but don't really have a great answer to it.
Can I try to sort of connect Bruce and Chris's talks with along this line, because there was one of the pieces of your talk, Bruce, that most stuck with me, was this idea of anti-elitism just being a sense that if you claim authority from something other than money, that was in itself illegitimate. And I have been reading some items about the People's Congress apparently being much richer than, say, the US Congress or almost any other body, that the people really in charge of the party are extremely wealthy. And to me, one of the watchwords of neoliberalism is, you know, upward wealth redistribution. You know, and I'm just wondering, is that part of this Chinese intellectual climate that really it all boils down to who are the entities that have the most money, and they are seen as legitimate, and everyone else is legitimate to the extent they could potentially, you know, they have some access to these sort of resources.
You know, remember in The Human Condition, Hannah Arendt says, she claims that it was the socialist countries where we had the first appearance of Homo economicus. And that was, and so in a certain way, and this is a kind of a line that I think could be teased out, are the, you know, some of the socialist roots of neoliberalism. Because I think that one, in certain respects, I mean, I'm not totally on board with her on this, you know, you could say that a type of Homo economicus emerges in the socialist period. But the reason that you have this happening, you know, the reason that everybody in the government is rich in China today is actually the non-separation, you know, between the economic and the political realm that really makes, you know, someone, I mean, that makes it sort of a matter of course, and it makes it natural that if you have the ability to get rich, you should be rich. I mean, if you have power, you should have economic power as well. So there was not really, you know, it's only in the current anti-corruption campaign that there's some kind of movement against this, but this was more the dominant for quite a long time. You know, in the reform period anyway.
Thanks for those two talks. I wanted to try to connect the two talks with a remark you made at the conclusion of yours, Chris, about the ways in which socialist dissenters in China created a virtual socialist state, in the name of which they produced their political resistance. And link that to a question about the state that Bruce proposed, sort of concluding remarks, that is, the state to be construed as the objectification of a collective will. I'm wondering if that isn't itself a kind of fantasy at present. And I'm wondering if the state is a much more complex apparatus at the present time, in which the warfare aspect of the state has dissolved or attempted to the welfare aspect of the state. And whether Trump is proposing ways to redistribute recognition of the different sectors of the state by proposing, as he has, a budget that renders it very, very difficult to maintain a notion of the state as an expression of anything other than an executive power. I'm wondering where politics comes in your account of liberal elites, which I understand to be a desire to rehabilitate liberal elites as structures that are not empowered by money, but by, in the strong sense, a collective will. But if those elites are already structured, how can they become part of an ongoing political formation? Doesn't your description turn them into a dimension of a state apparatus that is more or less durable? So I'm just wondering where the political force of your account would do its work.
Yeah, thanks. Can I just start with this?
Yeah, of course.
I'm not a political theorist. I don't have a new theory of the state. I've sort of been working with an old and crude model, which is a Marxist one. It's not the only Marxist one. The state as a site of struggle, in which certain historical victories have been won, which objectify something like collective will, and that those victories are objectified in those institutions, parts of the state, like the welfare parts, that the neoliberals want to close down and destroy. That's why they want to destroy and close them down, because they are places where, you know, the environment has, to some extent, been protected, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And it doesn't seem to me that I'm stretching credulity in making that suggestion that the welfare state was not entirely a top-down thing, it was also a bottom-up thing. And that's how I read the history. And of course, it's also encouraging to get to your final question, because it suggests that the things that we do have a political importance as part of that struggle. So for example, to the extent that we can change the nature of the credentials, the degree of accessibility of those credentials, we are actually making a political change within the credentialing and the professional authority that, you know, prevails in the institutions in which we find ourselves. So, you know, that will maybe seem a little bit too easy, but it goes with my sense that, you know, the state is a site of active contestation. That's sort of, I don't know whether I'm allowed to do this, but it leads to another way of talking about the connections between our talks. So, Chris, what I found myself asking myself when listening to you about the sort of collusion or the hidden relationship that the CCP has with neoliberalism in China, wouldn't it make sense to think of the CCP as itself riven in some way by different groups pulling in different directions, rather than, as you sort of rhetorically seem to suggest, as a thing that wanted one thing, as if everyone in it wanted the same thing, but it had to just hide its play. You know, it had to pretend to be doing the one thing, whereas it really was doing the other. That's one way of putting it. The other way to put it would be to say, well, there are different people in the CCP who are trying to pull in different directions. And that's maybe one of the reasons why you get different relations to neoliberalism. I just throw that out as, because you know the stuff and I don't. It's just like prejudice would lead me to think that might be the case.
I would say that yeah, of course. I mean, there's dissent and division in the party, much less than you would imagine. You know, there are select people who select party people and some of the people teaching in the party schools, some of the intellectuals in the party schools, which are, by the way, more freewheeling in the debate than most universities in China. You know, there's just a lot more of a genuine kind of not a marketplace of ideas, but conflict of ideas. But I would say that that there was a very badly written and kind of shoddily researched piece that came out that was discussed all over the country a few months ago a few years ago, called China Without Thought. And it was by a neoliberal public intellectual, and his big critique of China was that there weren't schools of thought, that there was no thought, that the country needed thought. And I think what it reflected was something that people saw was a relative dearth of kind of real direction debate in the country. I wanted to say, one thing about about Donald's question, which was that I really agree with the direction that your question went, and I think that the leftist intellectuals that I was going to discuss, the virtuality, the virtual existence of the socialist state for them leads them into a disengagement with real politics and a kind of I would say a preoccupation with a sort of historic strike, a kind of evaluation of various periods of revolutionary history, and an insistence on fidelity to this or that period of the pre-reform era, and in some cases the post-reform era. And I think that has and I think the connection between this sort of ideal or virtual state and depoliticization is
Chris, the reason I asked that question is because it seems to me that you're invoking that notion of the virtual socialist state in order to identify with the real dissenters, is also to suggest that there can be no internal political dissension within the CCP that could have force. In other words, you seem to have produced, by way of your descriptions, an impossible antagonism that makes politics seem a site of either despair or cynicism.
I wouldn't say that it's impossible, but I would say my real critique is a tactical critique. I think that this is at the present insufficiently engaged, and I think that it's not simply because of CCP or state repression that prevents that argument from happening. I think it's a tactical choice that's made, and my argument, yes, is that it's the wrong tactic.